Hello and welcome to Echoes of Understanding with Steph and Pete. I am Stephanie Ann Webb, encouragement and empowerment mentor, podcaster, author, and speaker. And my co-host is
Oh, me, yeah, I'm Peter Carrington. I'm a life and recovery coach and the creator of the podcast Big Al Cracking the Code to You.
awesome. And actually, how you and I met is on this app called Noom Vibe, and we do live talks on there.
Yeah.
And so you and I connected on there, and it's been a lot of fun getting to know you and all the other people on there. So also, Peter and I have really nice voices, and people keep telling us that. So we thought we should start a podcast together. Why not?
Yeah. Rock out, right? Why not? I think we also there's I think we share a certain awkwardness and quirkiness which people find for some reason appealing to them as well. So laugh at our expense, laugh with us, have your way.
Yes, please laugh with us. It's more fun that way. Okay, so one of the topics that came to my mind while we were discussing what we're going to do is labels,
Fun.
the purpose of labels, and the limitations of labels. And so, for anyone out there, Peter has talked about you have ADHD.
Yes.
And I thought I had ADHD. I was tested. I do not, but I have similar traits.
Mm.
And so, what came up for me was people, when I did get tested, I had people ask me, why do you need to know?
Mm.
And I didn't understand why they were asking that question. I thought, why wouldn't I need to know?
Right.
And that did bring me along in this questioning of, is it wrong to know? Why are people thinking that?
Yeah.
And so you have shared similarly that you also have had, when you say I have ADHD, you have had people say
Yeah.
things like, why do you need that label, right?
Sure, sure. And for me, it was, when I was in third, fourth grade, it wasn't ADHD then, it was just hyperactivity, right? And there was a medicine called Ritalin that I was put on. But when I was put on it, it really worked. I was able to focus. It's still at school. And but I kind of carried that stigma through adulthood. As an adult, I got my ADHD diagnosis. 10 years before that, someone had handed me a book called there you go, ADHD, driven to distraction. And it's all about ADHD. I'm like, well, I really resonate with this. I know this is what's happening with me. So I knew without knowing. I tried to read up on it a little bit more, but it didn't really become a thing to me until a family member was diagnosed, and then I dug deeper into ADHD. But I have to say, like after that label, after that initial diagnosis, I didn't know how to feel about it. I'm not sure I felt great about it. There was a certain sense of relief and not. The not was I knew I had it. This just confirms what I've known all along. And what do we do next? Because I had set up this whole personal framework in my mind about what I resonate with, how I act and live and go through my life and vocation with these ADHD quirks and superpowers, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But so it was very interesting. I think as I look back on it, when I did get that official label, there was some validation, but there's also some thoughts that weren't so great. It didn't make me feel that great. It actually made me feel a little bit disempowered, if that makes sense. So I felt both at the same time, and kind of head in the sand. Maybe I know it's there, but maybe if we don't talk about it, it's not really there. So that was my first experience with that type of a label.
That completely makes sense. And I feel like most people who have been diagnosed with that or anything else might understand that because it gives you an understanding of, oh, this makes sense. And I'm not that different. There are other people like me. There's nothing wrong with me. But then there's this sense of, oh, I am this. And you can kind of feel like you're in a label, you're in a box of this. And I am an HSP, highly sensitive person. And so I remember when I first found out about it made sense to why I struggle. I don't like being in crowds. I get very overstimulated easily and overwhelmed. And I was constantly told, Stephanie, don't get overwhelmed. I was always asked, what's wrong with you? I remember walking. So I used to live in Toronto and I was walking out of work with my friend and there were sirens. And I put my hands over my ears and I said, "Oh, it's so loud." And he's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I didn't know what was wrong. Why am I so different? I don't know. So finding out I was an HSP made so much sense and there's other people out there like me. But then you feel like, and I know that this can be an issue with people. And I think it's why some people, like I had a life coach who did ask me, "Why do you need to know?" Because they're worried you're going to get stuck in victim mentality. And I have joined some of the Facebook groups about HSP, ADHD, all of these different things. And there is this sense of, I can't do this because I've been
Right.
labeled as such.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. So had you before the diagnosis, had you kind of suspected it was a thing? I mean, I know you talked about the different incidents and occasions that you had that. Did you always feel a sense of like there's something wrong with me or something different about me, the way I process the environment around me, sights, sounds, etc. I'm just curious about that. Did you know before you knew?
I always thought I was just bizarre.
Mm.
I actually thought there was something wrong with me. I remember as a kid, I said to my sister, I think I'm an alien.
An alien? Yeah.
Because you know those floaters in your eyes? I thought, what is these weird things in my eyes? Why am I getting this? I must be some sort of weird alien. And then you find out other people experience this too. That's actually how my brain went. But I was always told I was too, whatever, you're too sensitive. You're too
Right.
much.
Mm.
Why can't you? Why are you? So yeah, I just thought there's something wrong with me. Um, and that's really hard for people to live like. When people ask me why do you put yourself down or why did you think you weren't good enough? I'm like, "Oh dear, you don't understand." When you grow up in a certain environment, like a highly critical environment, that's just what you believe about yourself because of what you're given. And once again, it's that label. You're too sensitive.
Makes sense.
Or, also you and I have talked about this before, that when somebody says you are this and then you believe it, you
Right.
start to become it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Yeah.
right? So if you're told that you have a problem, then you think that you have a problem and you
It
can
is
get
different.
stuck in that label.
So it's interesting that you say that because special ed today isn't what it was then. Then when I was growing up, and you were just kind of grouped into the person's doesn't learn like the rest of them, to being slow, to some very unkind labels that other children will put on you, perhaps even adults who just don't know better. And that was like the stigma that I had. Like I'm the class clown and dunce. I remember that word in the early 70s, mid 70s, being a thing, right? And I remember like grabbing on and holding on to that stigma. So I said, great, I'm just going to give him more of that class clowniness. And that's what I did. But I found that I related to people better. I had a more positive response. I was kind of clever at it, believe it or not. So yeah, so I was always the one that was most animated as I think about my other three brothers, one of four brothers. They were all like normal. They were just and like they are today, they're normal people, citizens, right? Me, not so much. I was the apple that fell furthest from the tree. Part of that was or is my neurodivergence and how I perceive the world, because I perceive the world differently than they do, right? And I often go back to that example of my brothers because it's the closest, most relevant kind of example or examples that I have throughout the formative years, right? I wasn't like them. I'm not like them. And so I just had to kind of navigate life in that manner. it's not that widely known that along with that label ADHD, there's always comorbidity or co-occurring depression that occurs with it. In fact, more often than not, with someone who's grown up with ADHD but brings that ADHD into adulthood, I think it's like 90% of the time you have comorbidity. Something else is going on. And for me, it was certainly depression, right? So I found out at a young age, I had that depression. I always had this certain sadness, I call it, that just kind of like stayed with me. And, but I figured out pretty quickly that if I can just act like they're acting and go through the body motions that they're doing, I'll feel better. And I did. But it's pretty exhausting, as you can imagine, right? But that was my normal. I didn't know any other way to live. And as far as I knew, like they were doing the same thing too. But I think a part of me did know that it wasn't that because when the activity subsided, like I was still restless, I was still not satisfied, and still buzzing at a fairly high rate. So yeah, that was that's a long way of saying yes. Some of those early stigmas and labels were self-fulfilling after a while because I started to believe that that's what I am, especially when I'm in school. That's who I am when I'm outside playing with my brothers and other friends are around. Um, so you kind of learn these tips and tricks to kind of compensate.
Yeah. I always felt exhausted all the time.
Exhausting.
And
Very
I
exhausting.
didn't know. And like you said, you're playing a part to fit in. Because if you're in certain spaces and I mean, I would get a laugh, so I would continue doing that until I got told, "Stop, Stephanie, that's inappropriate," or "Don't do that." And not, and mostly it was in church, um, which is a place where there was, I always felt a fakeness to it,
Yeah.
and I had to be a little Miss Perfect, goody goody two shoes,
Right.
which is how I would portray myself. But then when would, I remember, so in high school, so I grew up in the Christian school, but I went to a secular high school.
Okay.
And my friends, I liked Eminem and I would watch certain shows that was not allowed. And my friends would be shocked, like, you're goody goody two shoes when you like Eminem. But I also liked that. I liked being able to just be a little bit of a rebel because I felt I could, maybe this is more me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not goody goody two shoes, which I'm not. And it's more fun that way. So,
Speak,
but
speaking of quirkiness, if you're looking at us on video, like I just want to like kind of put this out in the forefront. So I do drink my water out of a mason jar, literally. So if you
nice.
see me going like this, I'm sipping my water, which I do quite often because I get dry mouth. It's a mason jar. So spoiler alert, maybe not, but that's certainly part of my quirkiness. And
Well,
you
it tastes better out of the mason jar, doesn't it?
sure does because I have one of these, kind of my refill bottle, but it is what it is.
And I feel better when I drink out of pretty pink teal cups like Starbucks.
Yeah, that matches your personality. It's like the mason jar
It's
match.
nice.
Mason jar says a lot about a man, but yeah. Cheers.
Well, okay, I have to share this story.
Mm,
So the label thing, it can be incredibly helpful because our brains want simple. If
mm,
you want to explain who somebody is or quickly if you're talking to somebody and they don't understand. So if I can use an example, when I talk about my background, I say I grew up Christian, and people say, "Well, I grew up Christian." Well, what does that mean? There's so many different denominations and aspects or parts of Christianity. So then I say, "Well, I grew up um, evangelical." Okay. There's the difference even with white evangelical, black evangelical. Then it
mm,
was like, well, are you liberal conservative? So I grew up conservative white evangelical. And then even then it was like, well, I grew up like kind of fundamentalist,
mm.
but not extreme fundamentalist. I grew up fundamentalist light version. So
Yeah.
if I'm to explain my background, so somebody actually understands what I came out of, they're like, okay, fundamentalist, conservative white evangelical. Then they get a sense based on what they perceive, what they understand it to be. And But even then, that's helpful to explain that. But then it's not helpful because people will have an idea of what they perceive that to be. And it's a generalization as well. So I have to say, well, yes, from what you know, the stories, the horror stories of that, yes, it's not my favorite part of growing up. But I also have feel like I have to have a caveat of saying like, but I know people who are grow up like that and they're not, or I know people who have that label and they're not like what you think it is. So that's where the label
Yeah.
is unhelpful because it also creates these judgments or what we think
Sure.
based on this label that we put upon people.
Yeah. So we have these labels, and of course, a lot of times those sub-labels do come along with them. Those preconceived ideas or prejudices do come along with that. And I find that people will treat me differently. If I say I'm a recovery coach, if in recovery for a decade, I'm treated one way. If I say I was in law enforcement for 25 years, I'm treated another way because then you're the cop, right? Um, then if I say I actually spent a year in prison because of that addiction, I may be treated another way. So it's just really interesting to see, especially when I'm telling my story of recovery from pain to purpose. It's interesting to see people's faces and how they're reacting, how they're responding to that story, because every step along the way, now another label is getting added. And some people want to stick with this label or just get rid of that and go to that label simply because they resonate with it more. And I think there's a little bit of all that in me. And certainly when I'm telling my story of recovery, that all comes out. And it's something that really, it really took time for me to kind of get through. And when you're recovery, like you go to these 12-step meetings, and probably your best bet is not to say that you're in law enforcement if you're at an NA meeting in your local town, right? Or even a town over. It's probably better off not to mention that um, because there's that stigma, right? And so I kind of found ways to kind of like navigate that, didn't incorporate it in my story, but sooner or later, I start to tell my story in its entirety. Now, when I shared my story early on, it was honest, it was open, but it wasn't the whole story because not everything is for everybody, and you kind of know your audience, as they say. Now it doesn't matter to me. I tell everybody because without fail, someone resonates with some part of it, or maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe I'm not your guy. But there are some commonalities, and that's my life became at some point very unmanageable because of addiction. And label or not, I think everybody in that realm really resonates with that. So
And I personally find it really awesome that you share that because that is you and that is your story. But it also helps to break that stigma, right? If you just tell me you were a police officer, I'm like, okay, well, Peter's this way. Okay, if you were in recovery, oh, well, Peter's this way. But when you bring your story and you weave it through, it's like, wow, Peter is this fascinating story that the fabric is weaving together to create who you are today. And I think the more that we talk about these things, that we are more than just one dimensional, because we all are. And our brains want it simplified into, well, this person's this way, because it just helps us to make it less complicated. But when we bring that kind of that complexity to it, that nuance, it opens up our world. I personally love it because I grew up very all or nothing, black and white thinking. Um, and it feels safe in that, but it actually causes a lot of anxiety.
yeah.
But to see people as just these complex beings rather than putting them in these labels of who we think they are, it helps to just actually truly love people better, I find.
Yeah. I agree with that. And those labels that I just talked about, the irony of life is this. I made a promise to my higher power, which is God, that if he took this taste for these pills out of my mouth, that I would serve him. And I did that in a prison cell, right? I was in there alone because I was under protective custody because I was in law enforcement. And that became for me the closet of God, right? And I made that promise that I would tell my story, my whole story. But it wasn't until I started doing that that people really started to listen. They really started to resonate. And just moving forward a little bit, as you know, I tried to do a little bit of acting. In fact, I did a little bit of acting, kind of on a whim, right? But my first two roles was a police officer and a prison inmate, in a reenactment series. And that was just the way of God, source, universe saying, hey, listen, just keep going on the path. This is the dichotomy. You're playing it now on screen. And by the way, you'll be talking to a group of people today, a group of men, and you'll be able to tell that story and how it happened in real life. So for me, in my mind, that was like super confirmation to be able to do that and kind of live in that space. But I think labels are important, but I do think they kind of can really box us in at times. So I drop it, but I don't always drop it. I drop it probably at a certain point of a conversation with people, because if you know me more than 2 days, you're going to know that I'm in recovery. You may not know my whole story, but somehow I work that in. And because I think it's important and it's relevant and affects so many people. And it's kind of that taboo, still that taboo label that no one wants to talk about. And so I think it's important to bring that label to the forefront and let them know, yes, I have that label too, guys. And
Yeah,
I'm doing, yeah.
you're doing it, and it's awesome. The world needs that.
Interesting.
Just to change it to a little bit of a different from what we were talking about, but still within labels. I recently heard of the term polymath, and it's somebody who, what is it? Jack of all trades, but master of none. People will say that, or you're doing different things. You're not, because we've been told our whole lives. Okay? I worked at a bank for 14 years. Okay, Steph, you worked at a bank. I don't fit in at the bank, so I've tried different things. And then when people ask you, what do you do? I'm like, I don't know. I do different things.
Right.
And so it's once again, kind of, we want to put somebody in oh, you're a
Absolutely.
banker. I'm not a banker, dude. Um, so also when they talk about find your niche, find who you are, what is your main focus? For me, I love speaking. I love podcasting. I love writing.
Yeah.
I love mentoring people. I like one-on-one and just seeing, encouraging people in that way. So if somebody says, well, you have to pick one, I can't, because the essence of who I am is just kind of all of that.
Hmm. Beautiful.
Um, so if you put me, to get back to labels, if you put me in the box of, well, Stephanie's just a writer or she's just a whatever, I'm more than that. And you do all of these, like you're podcasting and you're speaking and you're working with people and you're advocating, you
Yeah.
advocate for people with disabilities. Like you're doing so many different things as well.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
cool.
It is cool. So I've heard also of the word polymath, is it? But I don't
Yeah.
know what it was. I didn't Google it or ask Siri or Alexa what it was, but now you've told me. Now, yeah, so I'm Peter the polymath. That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I saw the term pop up here and there, but it wasn't until somebody actually said it to me. It's, oh, that's what people are saying. But
Well,
I
I
don't,
know there's a place for people like you and I in the world, right?
yeah.
I think it's a wonderful label to have. So
And it's fun to just try things.
yeah, it is.
Like I tried voiceover. I'm not really an actor. I didn't really enjoy that part, but I can speak into a mic and read things. So in at certain things I can do in with that regard, but I'm not a voiceover artist. I just can do some voiceover.
Mm.
So there's all of those different things when people ask, well, what do you do? I'm like, also Facebook and Instagram, Facebook specifically, you do not get much space to write who you are.
Right. Yes,
I
in
find that tricky.
that little space that they give you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's really cool because we get to explore some of these labels that we have, right? And we get to celebrate some. If we don't like it necessarily, maybe we can change or completely remove that aspect of our lives, because if we're getting honest with ourselves, maybe like there's some labels that we know kind of fit, but maybe they can't see whoever they are. And we get to reimagine that, or just change it or transmute it into something that we want, as opposed to something that we don't want. So I often talk about from pain to purpose, and so for me that was one of the journeys in my life. That was recovery, but it was also a learning disability, right? That I could not talk about. And I avoided like reading out loud in school and then in adulthood in front of people because of not only the ADHD, I didn't mention this label, dyslexia, and I would say that's my preeminent issue still, right? And I have done some acting, but like ask me to read off a teleprompter, I'm done. So I've had to adjust. I've had very gracious people I've worked with. When I did a commercial or a PSA, I had some really amazing people that I worked with that understood that and were able to kind of adjust things and let me kind of get through the script like I knew how to get through the script. And so I think there's space to examine other labels. I'm not crazy about the labels that, well, let me put it this way. I'm not crazy about the human nature and how we right away, what do you do for a living or what do you do? Because that means I have to make you this so I can continue to be whatever I'm going to be to you. Or maybe create this hierarchy, maybe of who's who and what's what. And so I think labels are positive, and I also think they can certainly hurt us.
There's a nuance to it, just like with everything.
Yeah, there really is. There really is. So,
Yeah. And the thing that I just keep coming back to in figuring out labels
mhm.
is yes, for us to make sense of it, it can be helpful, but also let's not close ourselves off by just thinking that it's that simple, that we can put people in a box and not see there's so much more potential for that person. There's so much more to them. There's so much more going on. And let's not limit ourselves in that.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about terms like diabetic. I'm a diabetic. I'm a schizophrenic. I'm a fill in the blank. And I think that just I want to use the word condemns us to a certain outcome in our lives. Certainly we can acknowledge any mental health problems or even diagnoses that we have, certainly medical. But I think once we identify that with the ick at the end of it, schizophrenic, diabetic, like those things, those labels, I think we can really do without. I mean, I think the healthcare industry and the medical industry and certainly pharma industries love those labels, right? Because it keeps people in those. And there are some conditions, not dismissing anyone I just spoke about, some conditions that you can actually make worse by the belief in that and by the self-identifying. And it goes back to what you're talking about with the self-fulfilling prophecy of it. So I would say for anybody who's struggling, maybe just consider, it can't hurt to maybe consider identifying a little bit differently. And the
Yeah.
12 step with recovery, people go into 12 step meetings. Hi, my name is Pete. I'm an addict. Hi, my name is Pete. I'm an alcoholic. Instead of saying, hi, my name is Peter. I'm in recovery from the dreadful disease of addiction. That was my tagline because I refused to say that every day because I knew the power of that statement, that I am statement, especially. So I would encourage anybody, right? If there's a certain area or label that's in your life that you don't like, uh, some of the symptoms, some of the things may be present, but it'll definitely move you in a better direction if you choose to, by just changing that verbiage up and changing that I am into something else, perhaps. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. That's such, that is so good
Hmm.
because we can, I think maybe this is what people get concerned about, is you have something that is a part of you or something that maybe not a part of you, but you struggle with, or it depends what it is, right? But it doesn't mean I am it. I don't have to identify with it because like you're saying, if I keep reiterating that, our words have power and what we believe about it has power. And so, Like if I kept saying, I'm so awkward, I did that for years. I'm so awkward. I'm so weird. Now I kind of take it like I'm weird, guys. I'm goofy and I have fun with it. But if I kept, the more I said I'm awkward, I'm weird, I became that. So I was awkward and weird in public. And then I was very shy because, and the first time I heard the word self-fulfilling or the term self-fulfilling prophecy was in psychology first year. I was like, what? Why did nobody tell me about this? This is really cool. So I always talk about psychology saved my life because
Mm.
understanding,
Right.
starting to learn that awareness of the things I was doing, the things I kept perpetuating in life, and that awareness is key.
Yeah, it really is.
Start changing things. So
Yeah, no, it really is. And I'm sure that we're going to have an episode in the not too distant future about self-talk and
yeah,
self-dialogue, right? And some of that self-talk was kind of given to us as children, right? Some of those beliefs that we have in those programs, and some of it we just go ahead and continue to repeat, not knowing that there is an impact, a tremendous impact on what we say to ourselves, how we identify with those labels, right? I think so. I think the story behind the story with labels is not only what we think about it, but how we act in that label or what we do with it. Again, once the diagnoses came, like in my adult, uh, diagnosis for ADHD. So we all have choices, but I think there are some basic things and pretty standard things that we can do, some psychological truths that we can kind of engage in to help us navigate this experience, which involves a lot of labels in our lives.
that's awesome. Ah, I think this is good time to close.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. This is our our initial what do you call it? See, that's ADHD. Our initial voyage, our maiden voyage, I guess. This is your
Um, I don't know, first episode.
yeah, something like that. But it's ADHD, and that's the quirkiness in us, right? Racing glass and all, right? And we're just two people navigating our way through life. And as the universe would have it, our paths crossed. And I think instantaneously for me, once I heard you speak, I'm like, there's something about her. Yes, she sounds pleasant. But something I do is if I'm watching something on a television or I'm listening to something, I'll look away and maybe even close my eyes if I can to really try to feel someone's energy, especially someone's energy that gets my attention. And yours was that, I could have gotten stuck in your voice, which is absolutely beautiful. It's amazing. You know it is, right? Even when you read the phone book, right? But what stayed with me is the Stephanie, the real you that I've grown to know and love, and really honor having in this man's life. So I really appreciate this time that we spent together, Steph.
Thank you. You're so sweet. Oh, yeah. So this was a lot of fun. And yeah, so this is our podcast, Echoes of Understanding. And I am Stephanie Ann Webb.
And I'm Peter Carrington.
Carrington.
Yeah, that's who I am, right?
This is why I'm here to help you remember your last name. So there we go.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Thank you. Bye.